Welcome to the next Complete Physio podcast. I'm Dave Baker, one of the clinical directors, and today we will be talking to Laura Thompson, who is our lead pediatric physio.
Mhm.
Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura. And yeah, we've just started up this pediatric physio or children's physio. Yeah, so I've been working with children for over 10 years now, and a mixture of in the NHS and kind of community roles and within hospitals, and then also some private things on the and in addition to that as well.
So just going to start off, Laura, just going to ask you some real basic questions about pediatric physio. So what would you say, what are the main differences, would you say, in terms of general MSK physio, adult physio, and working with sort of early years pediatrics? What are the main differences?
So I guess obvious difference is that children and adults are completely different in terms of their children haven't finished their development yet, and adults have. So the skeletal maturity it's not there yet. So you kind of have to be aware of that when treating children. Also, you can treat children from all ages, so they don't necessarily understand you all the time. So you have to find ways to be able to get them to do things that you want to do and maybe they don't want to do, or in a way that they don't know that they're actually doing some exercises, or so there are some challenges then within that as well. They're not always wanting to come or knowing what they're there for and that kind of thing. So yeah, and then obviously you get different conditions with children. You'll get different um conditions, common conditions in children that you won't get in adults. Obviously you still get the kind of sports injuries and that kind of
Yeah.
thing, or falling and breaking a leg, that kind of thing, but the rehab is then different from children to adults. So
Okay. So what would be the main differences you would say in terms of your approach for rehabilitation of a child with a broken leg, for example? So how does it differ, would you say?
um the m- my way of working will be with the child and making sure that they are having fun, because normally
Yeah.
children want to have fun.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes it may be actually similar because adults don't really want to do exercises
I was going to
either. So you
say
want to try and make it fun with an adult. But yeah, so and also,
yeah.
I'm always wanting to get the child so the main difference, I guess, is that there's a parent involved as well as
Yeah.
the child. So you want to get both the child and the parent
Yeah.
on board and
Yeah.
get their kind of goals and make
Yeah.
sure they're kind of lining up with yours. But I guess that's fairly similar to
Yeah.
the rehab in an adult, because it's kind of quite goal orientated with the work that we do. But yeah, I need to kind of make sure that they are aware of what you're doing, and the exercises may not be very obvious what you're kind of working on and the strengthening or things like that, because they just look like they're kind of playing.
Yeah.
So it's about explaining what you're doing and why,
Yeah.
a little bit more,
Yeah.
and yeah, making it fun for the
Uh-huh.
children, really.
So you provide, is it baby MOTs? Is that the right term? Baby MOTs?
uh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Can you just tell me a little bit about what that entails? So
Yeah, so I guess that kind of word's going around quite a lot, but
yeah.
I guess it's just an easy way of saying it's a full assessment of a
Yeah.
baby. So
Yeah.
if parents are kind of have a little bit of a worry,
Yeah.
as you do, it's quite normal to, see something or compare to other children, be quite worried that your child's not doing something that, you think they should or something, then it's just about having a full
Yeah.
assessment with a physio, and kind of basically going through everything. So a full
Yeah.
MOT, with what the parent might be concerned with, but
Yeah.
then checking everything else as well. So
Yeah.
that can be from kind of hips to
Yeah.
how they're moving to um, the range of movement of the
Yeah.
joints, or how they're playing and
Yeah.
and interacting and things
Yeah.
like that. So bit of everything really.
Yeah. So I'm a parent, and I'm what are the sorts of things that I might be looking out for? What are the sort of things that might be raising a concern with me for me to come and see a physio, or for me to
Hmm.
think, oh, an MOT would be a good idea? What would you
Yeah.
say?
So there's common things that can happen during the birth of a
Yeah.
child, or baby. And some of them are quite obvious straight away.
Yeah.
And most of them, I would say, would get picked up at that
Yeah.
time. But, sometimes they may be not as obvious, and then they can kind of be a bit more obvious a bit later. So one of the things is if your baby has a head turning preference, so they're always kind of looking to one side,
Okay.
or it's maybe a little bit stiff.
Yeah.
Again, with the feet, then if your baby's feet are turning inwards, or just one of them is turning
Yeah.
inwards and doesn't come out, that would be one of the things that we would want to assess and,
Yeah.
see. Then there's kind of general things if they're not using one side of their body
Yeah.
as much as the other. That's kind of in the early stages
Yeah.
really, and then as through their development is whether they're kind of meeting their milestones, or whether they
Yeah.
are rolling at the kind of there's an age range, so every child will do, they're in their own kind of time frame, and they
Yeah.
will differ. Every child will differ, but there is kind of a rough range that we would expect a child to do, say roll, or to sit by themselves,
Yeah.
to stand. And if they're not meeting those um milestones, then we'd definitely recommend getting an assessment,
Uh
and
huh.
actually earlier rather than later,
Yeah.
because most things are much better seen and treated earlier,
Yeah.
um, than kind of later, because
Yeah.
they can become just a little bit more, either of a habit or a bit more
Yeah.
chronic, or and just harder to treat then.
Okay.
Um,
So parents might have raised some of these issues with the GP.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That would probably the first kind of
Yeah.
thing that would go to the
Yeah.
GP, and then can get a referral in from there.
Yeah.
Um, Most places you can kind of self-refer in as well,
Yeah.
if you're kind of looking for a physio, and then
Yeah.
get in through there. And then also, if there are kind of things that picked up at birth,
Yeah.
sometimes a birth would be a bit more traumatic, or the professionals do maybe have a little few more concerns there. They may do a referral straight, or if your child is born prematurely,
Yeah.
that's one of the main things that
Yeah.
they would refer straight in for a
Uh-huh.
physio. A child that's born prematurely or have quite a traumatic birth
Yeah.
are more likely to then have those kind of developmental delays, so they're
Yeah.
not reaching their milestones as expected, or they'll find it more difficult to reach those. So getting physio early, they're more likely to then reach them. Yeah.
Okay. So if we talk about maybe some of the most common conditions that you see,
Hmm.
and just talk a little bit about what we would expect from the assessment, what the parent would expect at the assessment, and the sorts of treatment techniques that you use.
So one of them I mentioned earlier with the kind of head turning
Yeah.
preference, that can be a torticollis.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so the assessment kind of starts with actually lots of questions
Yeah.
actually about the birth, and whether
Yeah.
there's any kind of um whether there was any kind of trauma within that. So lots of different questions about the milestones there, and what they're doing, how they're kind of sleeping or even feeding, communicating, that kind of thing. And that's just to get a really broad kind of picture of what your baby's doing at the minute. It's part of the assessment to kind of rule out any other things as
Yeah.
well that we may be a little bit more concerned
Yeah.
about. And yeah, because we want to make sure that it is torticollis rather than anything that might be then causing that.
Yeah.
And torticollis is really easy to treat really when
Yeah.
you start early. Um, and actually within that, you'll always do kind of a full hip check, and the way the arms
Yeah.
moving and that kind of thing. And then we'd probably go on to looking at how the head is moving, the range of movement, so whether they can move it to the other side. It's
Yeah.
just become a bit more of a habit, or
Yeah.
the muscles are tight because they've been kind of crammed in the
Yeah.
for that long time. And then we'll be able to show then stretches,
Yeah.
mainly is the treatment for torticollis. Um, then there's other common things like, again, talipes I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, where the feet turn inwards.
Yeah.
And again, that's assessment and making sure it is true to the positional talipes, which is what happens when they are, again, squished a little bit in utero, and their muscles have just become a bit stretched or tight on one side. So there are, it's different to clubfoot. Clubfoot is a part of the kind of anatomy is it's
Yeah.
fixed then, so we can make sure that their foot can move.
Yeah.
And then there's exercises to do to encourage the baby to move, and then we can do stretches as well with
Yeah.
it. So again, a really treatable thing, but really important to get in there early.
Yeah.
Then we've got things like, so if a baby was born early, it'll
Yeah.
be monitoring and assessments for any and again, if it was traumatic birth, if there were any kind of even brain injuries at that time.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not really obvious. Sometimes it will be known, and maybe the baby will have some scans and things at that time. So I would see then any kind of potential neurological conditions from that.
Yeah.
Or if a baby was born early, it's just then monitoring, because you don't always know,
Yeah.
how they're going to be later on. So, and then helping them with their milestones,
Yeah.
because then it is then harder for babies born prematurely, because they haven't got that full development before they were born. They
Yeah.
kind of need a little bit more time to
Yeah.
reach those stages. So it's kind of helping them on their way through the exercises, based around play and the positioning, what they're
Yeah.
doing. So that's kind of birth injuries, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then there's other than things, even children, if they have maybe fallen, they've broken
Yeah.
bone, it's rehab after that.
Yeah.
It can in young kids, there's a lot of hip problems you can get, so
Yeah. Yeah.
hip dysplasia,
Yeah.
and Perthes, and then it's kind of rehab after the kind of treatments for those. So that often, if those conditions are an orthopedic consultant would be involved then,
Yeah.
and it would be kind of rehab or conservative rehab through those processes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's loads and loads of conditions. Those are maybe probably the most common ones. You also, with the torticollis, you can get if a baby is constantly looking one side and always on their back, the
Yeah.
head shape will flatten.
Yeah.
And again, it's assessing that, make sure that is the only reason, is that
Yeah.
just because they have been on their back and turned to one
Yeah.
side. There's a chance that it could be other reasons, but it's kind of assessments for that. But then again, advice and
Yeah.
treatment to prevent that getting worse, but also a child's head shape
Yeah.
is quite malleable. It
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
change,
Yeah.
and it's not fused until they're kind of over
Yeah.
2 years
Yeah.
old. So it has got good time
Yeah.
to remold itself.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of advice, and sometimes that happens quite quickly.
Yeah.
With the
So what are the treatment strategies for, we're talking about flathead syndrome here, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah. So what are the treatment strategies that you're using for flathead syndrome?
So it will mainly be positioning.
Yeah.
So advice on different positions
Yeah.
that we can put the baby in,
Yeah.
that kind of takes the pressure off
Yeah.
that part of the head. And that can be kind of side lying
Yeah.
on their tummy. Babies don't normally like being on their tummy,
Yeah.
but it's how to adapt that
Yeah.
position that they may accept it a little
Yeah.
bit
Yeah.
better. And then if it is because of a torticollis, it's
Yeah.
treating that torticollis that
Yeah.
will help it as well.
Yeah.
There's loads of different positions and even holding in arms that you can kind of do that alleviates that pressure on the head. So you can still be doing tummy time or side lying, but the baby doesn't necessarily know, or it's much more comfortable because it's been held.
So it's about reducing the time that they're putting the pressure on the back of the head, which can then be sort of self. Okay. What about the use of helmets? Are they still used?
I don't like to comment too much about helmets. Generally, I would say, well, it depends on the cause of the flat head. So if it is purely positional, then generally I would say helmets are not needed.
Okay.
Because there are other things that you can
have
do
they been
that will
overused
change.
in the past, would you say?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, okay.
There are some other conditions, or it can be more of a kind of the skull bones are fusing earlier than they should and things like that, so that then it is more of a fixed. So that would then involve more consultants, doctors and things to do those assessments. And but generally I would not advise helmets. Essentially.
So for more extreme cases potentially, and always under a sort of consultant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we got parents watching this, and just in terms of what particular things might they be looking out for that would make them want to sort of think about coming in for an MOT, essentially?
So really, it's having a look at what your baby's doing, and so if they are using one side more than the other, so that's arm or leg or both. If they are really just kind of looking to one side and ignoring the other, any kind of maybe slightly unusual or asymmetric positioning of their legs or arms. So if one leg is kind of interned a lot more, or turned outwards, if one leg is shorter than the other, if they're constantly kind of bending one arm, or fisting their hands with their thumb kind of tucked in. Lots of babies do that, but if it's kind of constant, then I'd probably look at those things. Also, even simple things like the baby's not moving, or not, at the right age, not lifting their kind of legs off the flat surface.
And I'm right in saying that a lot of the things you just mentioned, they can be completely normal. So people, and the outcome of the MOT oftentimes is going to be reassurance that there is nothing to worry about, and that actually everything's normal. And it's just really just having that opportunity to discuss some of their concerns. And we've talked about the fact that everyone develops slightly differently and at different times, and so it's really just getting that professional overview to say, actually, this is all completely normal. It doesn't seem to be any.
Absolutely. More often than not, it is normal. And there's even little things that a child may look to one side all the time, but it may be simply because that is where the TV's on, or where the stimulus is, or the child's in the cot and you're walking to the cot and they're looking at you, so they're always going to that side. But it's always worth being checked out anyway. And I was just thinking of other things. So then the other thing is when they're kind of reaching their milestones. It's things like how they're interacting as well as what they're doing. So they're kind of smiling at about 6 weeks. And then when they're getting to kind of 3-4 months, you're expecting them to start rolling. You're expecting them to bring their legs up, maybe hold on to their feet, kind of starting to be aware of that, kind of those feet are theirs, and then they're kind of rolling. And that will probably start with an accident first. Like they'll just, suddenly I can do this. And it's kind of rolling onto the side, and then and then they'll learn to go all the way onto their stomach, or from their stomach out, because they don't like tummy time. So there's those kind of things around 3, 4, 5 months, and then sitting anywhere between 6 and 9 months, they'll
Yeah.
start sitting and holding up,
Yeah. Yeah.
or you'll start to become a bit more stable, and then independent sitting, 6 to 9 months is
Yeah.
where we'd kind of say.
Yeah.
um
That's a big variation, yeah,
yeah,
because it's like nearly
exactly.
50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So big variation. So that can all be completely normal.
Yeah, it can completely normal, but
Yeah.
if they're not kind of doing it at that
Yeah.
stage, then again, they could be completely normal,
Yeah.
but they may just need a little bit of help
Yeah.
to do the right, to generally strengthening, but doing the
Yeah.
right, exercises, or playing in the right way to
Yeah.
encourage them to be able to do it themselves.
So, yeah, I mean, it's really so. As a parent, what sorts of things might I do as a parent to try to encourage the baby to perform these activities, to perform
Hmm.
these movements? Is there any good ways to facilitate this that you can
Um,
suggest?
yeah, so generally
Yeah,
when they're little, it's very much about um playing,
yeah,
but
yeah,
positioning of toys is very important. And initially it's everything to the kind of middle, so we
yeah,
want hands together, want them playing with things in the middle.
yeah,
um and whether that is when they are lying, when they're on their side and they're sitting, bringing that to middle is actually a really important
yeah.
kind of developmental
Okay.
um part of it.
Yeah,
um and then from doing that and learning the movements, that what movements are normally kind of forgotten about or not really realized that
yeah,
are really important is the transitional
yeah,
movements. So you can kind of put your baby in sitting,
yeah,
but it's not much point in them sitting if they can't get from lying to sitting.
yeah,
They'll just get frustrated if they're
yeah,
old enough. They'll be like, actually, they'll lie on the floor, but they want to sit and
yeah,
they don't know how to. So it's about moving the toys to be able to um kind of teach them the process
yeah,
of getting to those places.
yeah,
And again, it's even before that, it's moving the head, so
yeah,
following things
yeah,
within the room. um and then it gets to a point where instead of having toys on the floor,
yeah,
it's putting toys a little bit higher.
yeah,
So they have to move to be able
yeah,
to get them, or a little bit further away.
yeah,
So they have to reach for that toy.
yeah,
They haven't just got it all
yeah.
right near them, because they won't learn or need to move.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of the time it's the positioning of toys and how we're playing with
Uh-huh.
interacting with the child, that there's simple strategies that
Yeah.
then will um push them to do a bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah.
So that's really interesting, Laura. So I love the idea of sort of, using that sort of natural sort of instinct within the baby to reach out and grab and look, as a way of sort of facilitating posture and movement. So are there any other sort of particular tips or strategies that you can sort of advise for parents around this?
Yeah, one of the main things, and especially kind of in the times that we're at, is actually just being aware of where the
Yeah,
stimulus in the room is.
yeah,
um and if you've got a TV on,
yeah,
anyone, babies especially, will be
yeah,
drawn to that
yeah,
TV.
yeah,
So if they're in a bouncer and it's always on their right, they are always going to be
yeah,
looking to
yeah,
their right. So even if it's, well, turn the TV off, or
yeah.
um or turning the bouncer
Yeah,
around so they have to look the other side.
yeah,
That's one of the easiest things
yeah,
to
yeah,
do. But it's even if it's not the TV, it's in anything. So if they're in a bouncer and you're in the kitchen doing
yeah,
something, you can see them, it's the same
yeah,
room, but if they're always in the same direction, they're
yeah,
always going to be looking over there.
yeah.
So it's again, turn that bouncer around,
Yeah,
or turn the chair around, or whatever they're in.
yeah. So making sure
um
there's a variety of the
yeah.
position relative to the baby with where
Yeah.
the main
And it's the
stimulus.
same as kind of holding them.
Yeah,
Everyone will always prefer one side to hold them,
yeah,
but actually swapping sides is really important.
yeah.
Sometimes babies will nestle into a neck, or sometimes they'll be out looking at all the other people in the room.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
it's about what they're doing and the circumstance and stuff, but being aware to kind of
yeah,
swap
Yeah.
swap shoulders, and
Yeah.
even when feeding as well. I'm sure mothers have always been kind of told to swap sides anyway,
Yeah.
and how they're kind of holding them.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's however works, but
Yeah.
yeah, so things like that. Approaching the cot.
Yeah.
It's like whether you can just turn the baby around,
Yeah.
so then they're going the other way.
Yeah.
Um, and if you have kind of lots of hanging toys and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
whether they're both sides or
Yeah.
there's always one side.
Yeah.
One of the other big things is a mirror. So
Mhm.
the same kind of thing. Babies will always be drawn to a mirror.
Yeah.
So it's just being aware of what is in the room, and
Yeah.
what that baby is interested in at that
Yeah.
time, and just I guess being aware of everything that's
Yeah.
around, and what things you can do, whether it is just simply turn them around,
Yeah.
um, or move things so they
Yeah.
are different
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking very much about sort of babies at this stage, yeah. So if
Mhm.
we move forward like a few months,
Mhm.
and we've got the baby started to crawl and sort of attempting to walk,
Mhm.
any sort of tips around that sort of stage?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of mentioned it earlier, is where the toys are.
Yeah.
So not having them always on the floor,
Yeah.
because
Make them work for them, yeah.
yeah, the baby needs to have a reason to do it. If they're quite happy crawling, and
Yeah.
actually the transition between crawling and walking, you always get a point where they
Yeah.
can stand and they can maybe take a few steps, but they'll just go back down and start crawling because they're so much faster in it. And again, also it happens when you're rolling to crawling.
Yeah.
They're much faster rolling. They're just going to do that. But if they, once they become stronger and more stable, say on their feet,
Yeah.
then they will then start walking. As a preferred. But yeah, giving them that chance, to the encouragement
Yeah.
to always be, having to go up onto their feet to
Yeah.
reach something,
Yeah.
or toys that have to be, they're a bit taller, so they kind of have to go down to the floor
Yeah.
to pick something up, and then they have to get up to put something a bit higher. That is in itself kind of going from the floor to standing is a
Yeah.
strengthening
Yeah.
exercise,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But if they're doing that all the time, they are going to be getting stronger, more stable, and then be much better at, better off going into that kind of walking phase. So yeah, it's simply kind of moving things up
Yeah.
to that higher surface in a safe way, of course.
Of course. So, Laura, we've talked about sort of how to sort of arrange the environment from a sort of like with regard to the stimulus to the child. I'd just like to ask you a few questions. You must have had lots of experience of seeing sort of the aftermath of such
Mhm.
situations. So, what tips would you give, particularly to parents, to avoid injury, to avoid any mishaps,
Mhm.
particularly through the different developmental stages as the baby starts to become a bit more mobile?
Yeah. Um, so one of the main ones is when they're a baby
Mm.
is changing tables.
Yeah.
Um, and although maybe your baby can't really roll, move
Hmm.
yet, babies often wriggle, and even if they are kind of maybe coming to that stage,
Yeah.
that stage will happen really quickly, or
Yeah.
sometimes the baby will just do it without even realizing. Um, and I would always say, have a hand on the baby on a
Yeah.
changing mat,
Yeah.
or a changing table, even if you're just kind of reaching for a
Yeah.
nappy for a second. I
Yeah.
would, just for yeah, real safety. I've seen quite a few kids who have fallen off baby
Yeah.
changings and
Yeah.
had quite horrible injuries.
Yeah.
So that would be one of them,
Yeah.
as a main kind of from the baby kind of point of view. When they're getting a bit older, moving a bit more, it's obviously baby proofing the area, so
Yeah.
then kind of corners of cabinets or
Yeah.
shelving units, making sure the shelving units are fixed to the
Yeah.
wall.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the simple things about
Yeah.
moving all the, things that babies are going to grab everything, right?
Yeah.
So just moving all those things, I'm
Yeah.
sure is a normal thing to do. But then when I am saying kind of putting toys a bit higher
Yeah.
on surfaces, it's making sure those surfaces don't move.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even, the babies are pulling up on things, right, when they
Yeah.
are in that stage. So making sure they're not pulling and pulling on top of them,
Yeah.
or pulling or pushing something that's going to go away from them,
Yeah.
and then they're going to fall.
Yeah.
So the little things like that. And
Stair gates when they start going
stair
up the
gates, yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. um, and top and bottom,
Yeah.
and making sure they are properly closed.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the main things is, well, maybe not for me, but I've
Yeah.
seen or heard things through, the nature of my
Yeah.
job is doorways, and fingers in doorways,
Yeah.
or heads
Yeah,
in
one
doorways,
of
and
my
legs in
we'll stop
doorways.
filming for a second. One of my earliest memories, one of my earliest memories is someone opened a door over the back of my hand.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
the most painful
yeah,
thing
yeah,
ever. It
yeah, yeah.
happened to
And
me
one
quite
of
a few
my
times as a
second
child.
earliest memories was I was sat in one of those like baby stools,
Yeah.
and I had a spoon in my mouth. I was eating a grapefruit,
Mm.
and I had a spoon in my mouth, and I fell out and sort of yeah, cut all my mouth. So two
Yeah.
early traumas. Two of my
Yeah.
earliest. Just thought I'd throw that in for
Yeah,
nothing.
that is. Yeah, having something in your mouth, and then and I guess the other thing is when children start kind of crawling around and moving a lot more,
Yeah,
or if it gets to summer, you're outside, there's actually maybe a few steps outside that you don't have a stair gate on and things. It's
yeah,
actually just, you know, making sure doors aren't open for
yeah,
them to be able to get out.
yeah,
And then if they are, it's making sure the baby is at the
yeah,
bottom of the stairs,
yeah,
or you're, right next to them, kind
yeah,
of thing, because they move so quickly. Even
yeah.
it's
So,
amazing how quickly they move sometimes.
and that's the thing, isn't it? I think the change, though, when the baby decides that they're going to start moving, and when those changes can happen so
Yeah,
quickly,
yeah,
and you've been used to a baby where you put it somewhere and it stays there, and then
mm,
suddenly they're off,
yeah,
and that
absolutely.
is so rapid. And I
Hmm.
think that's probably going to be the most sort of like the danger, the
Yeah,
danger phase
yeah, absolutely.
for
It is
accidents.
actually sometimes when they start moving, it's the most difficult time
Yeah,
because you
yeah, yeah,
can't keep your eyes off them.
yeah,
So yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely being aware of what's around, and the kind of um, dangers. Being
yeah,
aware of what dangers there are around
yeah,
before kind of letting
yeah.
your child loose.
We mentioned we touched upon some of the other some of the slightly older age groups that you see. So you see up to the age of what's the sort of oldest that
I mean, I can see kids up to the age of 16,
up to
really.
16. So if we just sort of take that section, that sort of subsection, maybe the sort of younger sports injuries. So
Hmm.
you do see the sort of younger sports
Yeah.
injuries. What things do you tend to see? What types of sports injuries do you see within those sort of younger age groups, would you
Yeah.
say?
So a lot of them might be kind of twisting
Yeah,
ankles, um, slightly, kind of mid to old,
yeah,
kind of 6 to 10-year-olds.
yeah,
They might be starting playing sport a bit more. They may fall. It's trips and falls,
yeah,
um, breaking legs,
yeah,
and it could be that when children are running, falling is part of the kind of
sure, yeah,
developmental
yeah,
process, really. But it's just how they fall and how severe that is, isn't
yeah,
it? Is generally those kind of things. Um, and those are the main things that I
yeah,
would see, really, is the kind of fractures.
yeah. So
Um,
post surgery, and also
yeah,
like when they're coming out of plaster,
yeah,
just getting them
absolutely.
back up to
Yeah,
return to sport and return to play.
yeah, absolutely. And then you've got these kind of developmental stages where they kind of suddenly have growth spurts, and you can get things called Osgood slatters
Yeah,
and severs. And that is, when they do suddenly grow, it's the kind of a tendinopathy, basically, on the knee or the ankle, the
yeah,
Achilles, and that causes pain,
yeah,
and that can be, then I'd see those. They're really common, but
yeah,
they're really painful as well.
yeah, yeah,
Shin splints, things like that.
yeah. And that tends to happen particularly around the time when they go through those growth spurts. So if your child sort of trousers are suddenly starting to look too small for
Yeah,
them, in other words, they've just grown a couple of inches,
yeah,
then they are at a risk of these
yeah,
particular types of
absolutely, and
conditions.
especially if they're doing
Yeah,
sports all the time. Kids
yeah,
are so um they'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Sport, kids that play sport, they're
Yeah.
often doing it all the time. They're kind of very aerobic. They're, then they're not strength based. They can just keep
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
all day sometimes,
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And often they're playing, sport at school, they do a club, and they're
Yeah.
doing loads and loads all at once. So
Yeah.
it's quite common just to get those kind of injuries when they are kind of growing at that
Yeah.
stage
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about flat feet
Yep.
in
That's
in children,
yeah.
because it's a preoccupation for many parents.
Mhm.
Has my child got flat feet? Has my child got a hallux valgus, sort of bunion type foot position? So yeah, I mean, what's the take on children with flat feet? Do we need to be doing anything? When do we need to be worried? When do we need to get an opinion?
Mhm. Flat feet are generally a normal variant
Yeah.
for children, and their feet aren't fully developed until a lot later. They're even 10 years old. Um, so generally, you don't really need to do much
Yeah.
about it. If you're worried about something,
Mm-hmm.
particularly within the
Yeah.
flat feet or foot position,
Yeah.
they're even foot position and even kind of knock knee positions.
Yeah.
Those are generally normal variants, but they can be more severe, and then you might need a bit more of an assessment or kind of treatment in that. But if you're really worried, I would say just get an assessment.
Yeah.
Generally, they are normal variants. There's
Yeah.
maybe a few kind of exercises and things we can do to prevent
Yeah.
anything, becoming an issue later on.
Yeah.
But generally, they don't cause issues. They
Okay. So
may
we
cause a little bit of pain or later on because of that position
yeah.
and the kind of the strength of the muscles needs to be
Okay,
that a
so
little
it's
bit more.
generally a very positive, reassuring message. No need to panic.
Yeah,
But if you're worried, then
yeah,
you can
yeah,
obviously get it
yeah.
looked at. Yeah, yeah,
One of the other things is hypermobility. That
yeah,
kind of gets thrown around quite a lot, and
yeah,
there's kind of hypermobility syndrome, and there's increased mobility at
yeah,
the joints, and
yeah,
generally kids are a lot more mobile.
yeah,
And then they start to, as they develop, they get a little less mobile,
yeah,
and everything gets stronger and more
yeah,
supple and that kind of thing. But that one is also another common thing that a worry, but it can also cause not problems,
yeah,
but it can be a lot harder to do things as children.
yeah,
They need to just be that little bit more, stronger, or if they have that increased mobility, they can then overstretch it quite a lot, and you can get injuries through
yeah,
that. But it's not necessarily something to really, really worry about. It's mainly if there are problems, if
yeah,
they are kind of having pain or
yeah,
fatigue and things like that, then you can
yeah,
kind of get an assessment and have some advice for treatment
yeah,
and strength ideas and that kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah. And as we're moving up a little bit more now through the age categories, just in terms of any guidance around sort of levels of training in the sort of younger age groups. I know certainly like lots of parents get sort of, warned against their child training more than, once or
hmm
twice a week, certainly doing any forms of resistance training. Any thoughts around that in terms of sort of, emerging research and
Yeah, I mean, I see it used to be a big no-no,
yeah,
the resistance training
yeah,
and strength training in younger kids, but really a lot of it is completely safe for children,
yeah,
and actually it's encouraged. It's or not encouraged, but beneficial
yeah,
for
sure,
children.
yeah, yeah,
As I say, they are very much kind of aerobic base, so they could run all day, but actually that strength base
yeah,
is what will help them with when they are growing, with getting older and in their sports themselves.
yeah,
Generally, kids will be able to do a lot, especially
yeah,
the kind of sporty kid that wants to do it. They won't necessarily say, no, I can't do that.
mm-hmm,
And really there isn't, I wouldn't say there's a limit, but what the
mm-hmm,
limit for me would be if it is impacting them in terms of getting injuries, their fatigue, things like that,
Yeah.
that's when maybe you need to start it. And if they're getting injured and stuff, it's then that kind of talk about what can be kind of
Yeah.
brought down a little bit. And actually, if they're not doing that kind of strength training, I'd add it in.
Yeah.
That is only going to
Interesting.
benefit them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has to be safe as well. So
Yeah.
obviously the right techniques and things like that, which can be advised, through
Yeah.
physio or that kind of thing
Uh-huh.
through for children. The difficulty or the kind of worry about it is around, it kind of depends on their developmental age,
Yeah.
and the children develop at different stages,
Yeah.
and at a certain point that one child at the age of
Yeah.
14 may be much more developed than another child at
Yeah.
the age of 14. So it's really difficult to put on um ages where they can do certain things, like
Yeah.
within the gym, or with what kind of strength they're doing.
Yeah.
So really, it's that the strength training, the resistance training is good, but there's a lot of things that you can do with kind of body weight, or and it's really, you need that guidance,
Yeah.
to know how much you can do.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult with kids to kind of, it has to be kind of guided with,
Yeah.
if they're doing weights.
Yeah.
But generally it is beneficial. But
Yeah.
a lot of the kind of taboo before was all about, it is difficult to know those kind of developmental
Yeah.
ages of the children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know a lot about it, to be honest. It is with where, like, a lot about how it kind of came about in the first
Yeah.
place, and what were the main, I'd have to go back on the research with it, but I just know what's current, and what's current is that the strength training is good, but there are lots of things that you can do
Yeah.
that kids probably don't do, is the body weight stuff
Yeah.
that you can start, or you need to start
Yeah.
at the base, and build up from there. And you
Yeah.
can build up in a way that's not putting loads and loads and loads of weights on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that kind of high reps and low weight kind of thing, and then building from there. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I doubt lots of younger children would go to the gym and do reps anyway, would they? But it was always this sort of thing I could never quite fathom, because kids climb trees, kids crawl around, this is a body weight exercise. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the mention of a gym, or
Mm-hmm.
the mention of doing anything with like resistance or weights or whatever, was always so it probably wasn't ever that much science behind it. It was just a kind of like, it got passed down through the generations.
Yeah.
Kids don't go to the gym, and that was the mindset. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
things have, I think things have changed now, haven't they? Science is, we're much more savvy about the sort of science around this now. So
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of research in the sports and children, and
Yeah.
like that higher level
yeah,
athlete of other child,
yeah,
young athletes.
Yeah.
A lot more research into it,
Yeah.
and it's generally beneficial in a controlled way as well.
So Laura, we've talked a lot about what sort of pediatric physio is, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about what it's not as well. So just to clarify, if we're seeing a baby with torticollis, we're not going in doing like manipulations of the neck or anything of that nature. Is that right?
That is right.
Yeah.
We will do stretches
Yeah.
in a kind of controlled
Yeah.
way, but generally our ethos is kind of doing it in the way that the child is fairly calm, actually.
Yeah.
And we like more of the kind of active movements,
Yeah.
encouraging active movements, and we wouldn't be doing any kind of manipulation with children's heads, necks, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It would be the kind of stretches, so
Yeah.
potentially holding them in a position,
Yeah.
but not forcing anything.
Yeah.
on.
So exercise and facilitating the movements
Yeah,
with the baby,
absolutely.
really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you work with consultants, so you would accept referrals from.
Yeah. I would accept referrals for any kind of consultant and health professional.
Yeah.
You get different types of
Yeah.
consultants. So you can have kind of the bones orthopedic
Yeah.
surgeon. You can have um, neurology. You can have pediatricians. So you
Yeah.
kind of have GPs are general, but then you can kind of go into a more of a child
Yeah.
um, consultant with an
Yeah.
pediatrician, and then in each area, it kind of depends on where the problem is.
Yeah.
Each area you have those consultants. So yes, there's a variety of different consultants
Yeah.
that would be able to refer into
Yeah.
physio and would know kind of when physio might be needed
Uh-huh.
and that kind of thing.
And the parent could just request their consultant to refer in to see a physio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So thank you ever so much, Laura, for really giving us a lot of information there about pediatric physio and what it's all about.
Hmm.
And lots of really, really interesting and useful information there for parents. So thank you ever so much for today.
Yep, you're welcome.
So, if you're thinking that you might want to book an appointment with Laura, it's Laura Thompson at Complete Physio. She's based predominantly at our Angel branch, and she accepts referrals from 0 to 16.
Yeah.